Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into something completely wild. It's a spiritual revelation that sits right at the intersection of our modern digital obsessions and, well, ancient spiritual concepts. Look, we all know we spend way too much time staring at our screens, right? But have you ever stopped to actually wonder what that screen time is doing to your soul? And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean literally. What actually happens to a mind that's just completely consumed by digital interfaces once the physical body is gone? Well, buckle up because the source material we're looking at today paints a wildly unique and honestly kind of unsettling picture of exactly that. Okay, let's dive into this. Just imagine this scenario for a second. You've lived a life entirely dictated by notifications, emails, the endless doom scroll, and then your time is up. You cross over into the afterlife. So, what happens next? Do you instantly find peace? Ascend to some higher plane? Well, according to the fascinating text we're breaking down today, for a lot of modern folks, the answer is a bizarre kind of future shock. You don't find enlightenment right out of the gate. Instead, you find yourself literally glitching out, completely unable to let go of the digital world you just left behind. To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to unpack a highly specific spiritual revelation. This comes directly from the teachings of Ryuho Okawa. It's a spiritual message recorded back on January 17th, 2018, that explores the ancient wisdom of Lord Ophearis, a deity closely connected to Greek and Egyptian mythology. Now, as always, we're just here to impartially unpack these claims and see what they're all about. And what's so incredible about this particular text is that it doesn't just stick to ancient history. It takes a sharp, direct look at our 21st century habits, diagnosing what it sees as a very modern kind of spiritual sickness. Section 1. The Modern Spiritual Blind Spot. Losing Our Invisible Senses. And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict presented in the revelation. The text argues we're living in an era defined by a massive spiritual blind spot. On one side, you've got our modern fixations, right? A hyper-focus on materialism, IT, the endless expanse of the internet, virtual wealth like Bitcoin. But the revelation argues that by pouring all our energy into those things, we've entirely lost sight of the reality on the other side. The spiritual world, natural mystical powers, and the profound truths hidden in myths and the divine. Basically, we've traded the invisible wonders of the universe for glowing rectangles. The absolute core of this argument is anchored perfectly right here in the title of Chapter 10. In modern times, what was originally visible has become invisible. The author makes this really compelling case. It's not that the spiritual world just packed up and vanished. It's that our total immersion in the material and digital realms has essentially blinded us to it. The mystical powers, the spirit world, they're still right there, but our modern, tech-addicted eyes simply can't perceive them anymore. So how did we get here? Well, the text, especially in its afterword, systematically breaks it all down. It points the finger at our absolute reliance on physical efficiency and our absolute obsession with screens. It notes how modern intellectuals tend to just dismiss faith as, something archaic and outdated. Plus, it argues our modern education systems are built entirely around expanding material wealth and knowledge, systematically burying any ancient wisdom or mystical insight along the way. We've literally been trained to only believe in what we can click, measure, or buy. Section 2. Phantom Fingers. Afterlife Glitches. So what's the ultimate consequence of all this spiritual blindness? The text paints this incredibly vivid and honestly kind of tragic imagery. Quote, "They just keep moving their fingers like they're operating a computer with both hands." Just picture that. Souls crossing over, completely stripped of their physical bodies and their beloved devices, yet they're compulsively typing in thin air. It's a phantom reflex. Their entire consciousness was so wrapped up in IT equipment during their life that this repetitive, mechanical action is literally the only thing they know how to do, even when the keyboard is long gone. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the surprisingly modern pop culture reference the source uses to drive this whole point home. The text actually compares these glitching, tech-addicted souls to the zombies from Michael Jackson's Thriller music video. It describes them endlessly twitching, moving their fingers in this rigid, totally unnatural way as they arrive in the afterlife. It's a slightly humorous comparison for sure, but it paints a deeply eerie picture of full-blown spiritual paralysis. And the tragedy of this situation goes even deeper. The text notes that spiritual guides in the afterlife actively try to help these confused souls. Quote, "When told please use other parts of your body, they just keep moving their fingers. They are completely
baffled. They've entirely forgotten how to utilize their other natural spiritual abilities because their earthly habits just hardwired their consciousness to a single, localized physical action. They are literally trapped in a loop of a physical habit in a completely non-physical realm. To show just how deeply ingrained this glitch really is, the revelation brings up the traditional concept of crossing the Sanzu River, which is basically the Japanese equivalent of the river Styx, right? The absolute boundary between the living and the dead. Even during this profound, overwhelming spiritual transition, literally crossing over into the great unknown, these modern souls are described as just trying to hit a phantom keyboard. They are utterly disconnected from the monumental reality of what is actually happening to them.
And hey, the confusion isn't just about typing either. The text also highlights this weird sort of phantom shopping phenomenon. It shares a specific anecdote about people arriving in the spirit world and wanting to simply go to a shrine or temple and buy their way out of a problem, just like clicking add to cart online. They're totally baffled to discover that in the afterlife, you can't just throw money at a problem or instantly buy whatever you want. All those material habits they relied on, utterly useless. Section 3. The long spiritual rehabilitation, deprogramming the digital soul.
So obviously, if a soul arrives in this phantom typing state, they can't just stay glitching out forever, right? The revelation outlines a very clear and very grueling timeline for these individuals. Phase 1 is death, the end of the physical body. Then hits phase 2, the shock phase, where they realize all their technology and material wealth are completely useless. Then comes phase 3, where the real heavy lifting begins, deprogramming. This is the arduous, brutal process of breaking that compulsive typing habit. Only after that's finally completed can they reach phase 4, the reawakening, where their dormant spiritual senses are finally, thankfully, restored.
So the crucial point is just how difficult the text claims this rehab process actually is. The source specifically notes that rehabilitating those whose minds were, quote, full of computers is an immense challenge. Think about it. Because they spent decades just staring at screens, completely ignoring their spiritual nature, their souls have become rigidly inflexible. Readapting them to the fluid, dynamic reality of the spirit world, it takes extraordinary effort. The language the text uses here is intentionally striking. Quote, it requires a tremendous amount of time to apply this deprogramming once they return to the other world. Actually, the original text even uses terms that translate closer to de-brainwashing. That's intense, right? It's meant to shock the reader into realizing that digital addiction isn't just a bad habit you can drop. It's a fundamental rewiring of your consciousness that's going to require massive, incredibly time-consuming spiritual therapy to undo later on. Section 4. Reclaiming our invisible senses. What we can do now. Now, hearing all of this might sound a little daunting, I know, but the whole purpose of this text is to change how we live right now. It issues a very direct, stern warning to anyone banking their entire existence on the virtual world. It explicitly calls out things like Bitcoin and endless computer operations. The message is super clear. Human life is remarkably short. If your time is up and all you've accumulated is virtual wealth or, I don't know, a high score in a video game, you're going to arrive spiritually bankrupt. The text urges us to realize that the ultimate game over screen of life requires something entirely different from us. Let's move to and see how this builds into actionable advice. How does this translate into practical steps for reclaiming our humanity? Well, the revelation advises us to stop relying solely on technology to solve every single one of our problems. We need to actively recognize the limits of our physical, material lives. Importantly, it suggests returning to normal human states. For example, deeply understanding the difference between the physical act of typing on a keyboard and the spiritual act of pressing your hands together in prayer. Ultimately, it's a massive call to deliberately deepen our spiritual awareness every single day. And this all ties perfectly back to the broader theme of the teachings of Lord Ophearis found throughout the entire book. If we want to avoid becoming a glitching phantom typist, we have to actively work to revive the mystical powers and the faith that modern intellect has tried so hard to bury. The text is literally begging us to look back at the myths, the gods, and the ancient wisdom we've tossed aside as old-fashioned and recognize that they actually hold the absolute key to our real, long-term spiritual health. It's just a fascinating, highly provocative way to look at our relationship with technology, isn't it? It forces us to ask, is the sheer convenience of our devices really worth the potential dulling of our spiritual senses? So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a quick challenge. Take a moment. Look up from your screen right now. Seriously, do it. Look around the room, take a deep breath.
What invisible realities, what natural wonders might you be missing simply because you forgot to look for them? Thanks so much for joining me on this journey today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.